went this legislative session?
$1 billion for Maui, $5 billion in tax cuts. We've got a lot to talk about. Spotlight Now starts now.
You're watching Spotlight Now with Ryan Kalei-Suji and Yunji Denise on Hawaii News Now. Have questions or comments for our guests? Join the conversation in our Facebook live stream. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Well, thanks for tuning in here on this wet Tuesday. We hope you're all staying safe and dry out there. Joining us now live here in the studio is Governor Josh Green. Thank you so much, Governor. Great to see you again.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You know, as we talked about at the top here, end of another legislative session. A lot happened this session. Want to just get your overall general thought and consensus of how things went for you and some of the things that you were pushing for this session and how overall you thought lawmakers did.
Well, it was a lot less chaotic than the last session. They did some great things, absolutely great things to support our recovery in Maui and tax breaks for the people of Hawaii. We got to talk about that. I mean, that is just unbelievably good. They passed the second part of our GAP tax plan, which is over $5 billion of tax breaks for working people. So we'll dive into that. So some very important things happened. Also, I was amazed that we passed the short-term rental bill. That was only like 3 months in the making, in debate, and it's obviously a necessity because of the shortage of housing we have, especially on Maui and West Maui specifically. So there were some great things that happened. There were a few moments that I wish had played out better. I definitely think we still have to deal with going forward what we have as far as insurance against major disasters, against increases in insurance costs for condos and so on. That's so important that we could even end up in a special session to fix that if we see spikes in cost. But overall, they did a lot of very important work. And look, we've now achieved a couple of the very signature goals we had coming into this term, which were change how we make affordability look like in the state. So now it's going to be about $4,000 per taxpayer back into their pockets because of extra tax breaks. That's affordability, and then this big move on housing, which will make things more affordable. So I'm pretty happy. There's a few things left to do, but I appreciate it.
Okay, I want to dive into each of those, but let's start with what you just ended on, which would be big news as a possible special session. What are you looking at specifically? It's interesting because when we had House and Senate leadership on this program before the session started, they also outlined insurance and especially what's happening to the condo market as a key priority. Things didn't come to pass as they perhaps could have. What are you looking at and what would trigger that for you?
So if we see large spikes in insurance costs for condos, we're already seeing them for townhouses, I think we should pass our chair, or I should say Speaker Psyche's bill. That bill was very well thought out. He did a great job framing what we need to do. We needed $20 million as a down payment, and our insurance folks are telling us that we are very vulnerable if more insurers leave the market. So we have to do something like that. If I see spikes, I would definitely call the legislature back in to finish off the compromises and get it done. Apparently there was a bit of a feud that developed at the very end, and that bill died. But look, we cannot have people be uninsured in their homes. So with fires, and we had the volcanic eruption a couple of years ago, it's getting harder to insure properties in Hawaii. So that will have to be fixed. And the Senate will be back into session for some judges, I believe, like either the end of June or the first week of July. If it looks dire, we'll come back, all of us, and fix that.
One of the other things that had happened and that we talked about the last time you were on here, specifically with the rainy day fund, $300 million being added back into the rainy day fund. Just overall, when you were last on the program, we talked about other mechanisms that could potentially go towards, funding what you call the climate change fund that would maybe combat some of the things that we saw obviously on Maui. And also maybe tying into this insurance problem as well. And you had pitched this idea of the interest that is raised on this rainy day fund. Any more thoughts or conversations had about what that could look like moving forward?
Yes. So there were 3 bills that did not pass, which I would have liked to see passed. And let me again reiterate, incredible mahalos to the legislature for giving us enough money to deal with Maui and the tax breaks and keeping our housing projects going. But those bills, the climate impact fee, which we could simply do instead of as an additional fee, like I broke the news here, taking the juice or the growth from that $1.5 billion rainy day fund that we have, that's one potential proposal. And then we don't even have to talk about, taxing travelers as they come in. We don't have to talk about TAT, any of that stuff. That would work. I've tasked Chris Benjamin, who's a retired executive, to lead that committee with my attorney teams, with everybody under the sun that has ideas on this. They will give us a good proposal for the next session. Sometimes legislatively, you got to build a ton of consensus, and you have to make sure that you don't have any enemies killing your bills. So I think Chris will be the guy for that. And I also have a really nice climate team developing. I will ask them also to weigh in on these insurance questions, because we're going to have to address what happens if we see big spikes in our energy costs, if we see a big problem as far as fire mitigation. All of this is going to be kind of in their lap. It's called the CAT, the Climate Action Team. So expect that proposal also then. I mean, I could do it right now with you guys in a couple hours and a few legislators that want to do it. But it will be totally vetted over the course of the next 7 months. And I hope that we do this, because I will tell you, without getting into some of the information that I'm just not allowed to talk about as far as negotiations on settlements and so on for property and what have you, we're going to need a lot of resource going forward in case other fires occur. And I'm not talking about HECO. I'm not talking about anything else. I'm talking about we need to have resources, because it is extraordinarily difficult to rebuild. And I want to care for everybody and take care of their needs who lost homes or lost businesses, and we don't have a big surplus. So we need that money, and I will hopefully get us there to a kind of an agreement with the ledge.
And for folks who are not familiar, Chris Benjamin is, of course, the former head of Alexander and Baldwin, recently retired and now drafted by the governor in this new role. Very interesting. Yeah,
he was on my transition team too, and helped vet a lot of our cabinet members, and our cabinet came out really good. I mean, these are good people. So he's been helpful, and he has a particular interest in climate change, which is why it's great to have him. But I have other climate people too, but a lot of those folks are still full-time in their jobs, and they actually have conflicts because they may work for some climate company. Like, for instance, I love Jeff Michelina, but he works for the HEC on climate, and I think that's his job. So I try to avoid major conflicts when I can.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about those tax cuts. Pretty monumental for a lot of families, will mean a lot of money in their pockets, will also mean money that is not for the state to use. What are your concerns, if any, about the consequences of that going forward? I mean, one of the things about the last session and this one is that you had money to work with. You're going to have a little bit less of it because of these tax cuts.
Yeah, so this is a graph, just so people, I don't know if people can get a good look at this, but this is a early draft, which I'll give a full presentation once it all kicks in. This is income tax changes for families of 4 with a median of 88 grand of income. Living, when they're paying their rent, paying for school, paying for food, they don't have a lot of extra money. And it ramps up very significantly in 26, 7, 8, and so on. Why do you do this? Well, by giving an average of about $4,000 back to each of those families, that's like $350 a month. And that's the difference between being able to pay for those necessities for their kids or not. It's a very big deal. We go from the second highest taxed state in the country to the 4th lowest taxed state in the country with this plan. So yes, it will take $5 billion out of, over the long term, the general fund plan, but a couple good things. It's a super stimulus, right? Because all of this money, all of it stays in Hawaii, unless people freaking fly to Vegas. Okay, do not go to Vegas with this tax break, please. Pay for extra shoes and TVs and services in Hawaii. Go to local restaurants, do those things, have first birthday parties, do everything that you can here with that extra money. And I think people will spend the money because they have to pay their rent. So that is a big stimulus for us. So I'm gaming out the economic benefits of that. Now, in the out years, there's some other things I'm going to unveil. I can't get into great detail about this right now because it's going to be a 6-month process. But I am going to streamline government in the next 15 months. I'm going to do what I can for example, just a tiny example, positions that haven't been filled for 4, 5, 6 years. In general, I would like to get rid of those positions, and I'd like to increase people's pay who are in their jobs. So people get paid a little bit more if they're public workers or if they are getting tax breaks if they're in private sector. I want to pay people more, but I want to get rid of some of the waste. And there could be some savings there. Also, a lot of times at the end of every year, in fact, there's this surplus that does not get spent. It's kind of a rollover balance or a carryover balance. And it's because we have some, kind of some extra room to maneuver. And that money I would rather see be in people's pockets in the form of the tax breaks rather than kind of sitting. So that's how I'm approaching things. It's just kind of a more transparent, honest approach to spend. And I think people are going to like it. It is, it's challenging, but look, I spent a lot of energy listening to people before I became governor, and everyone said affordability was their number one problem. And the corollary to that was housing, the cost of housing, which is what drove their affordability question. So what are we doing? We're going to do big tax breaks, and I need to really surge the number of houses in our market, which is going to be the short-term rental bill, the new bill on housing, presumably, and just me being under emergency rules building housing. We need a lot of those houses to come back so people's rents or prices to buy houses come down. If we do those two things, and I have some success over time on homelessness, I think we're going to be pretty happy.
Another area that was you would consider a win this legislative session was in the Agriculture Committee. A lot of money going now towards biosecurity. We are seeing a lot of headlines and stories and concerned residents over invasive species like the coconut rhinoceros beetle that really has plagued all islands. Now, your overall thoughts on what is being done for the prevention of these invasive species and how agriculture overall fared this legislative session?
We need more resources for invasive species. We put 20 million in, which, by the way, I should say the legislature put 20 million in, and that was excellent. I've been stung on my butt by a fire ant, and it hurts a lot. So I want to put an end to that for the people in Hilo and everywhere else where there are fire ants. And the coconut rhinoceros beetle is destroying, a lot of our foliage. So yes, it has to happen. I hope that spend will work. Definitely we just have to be vigilant. And there's not enough people that work in the environmental sector. I mean, that's one of the great challenges. So I hope this makes a big difference. We probably have to have a lot more biosecurity. In fact, one of the things that we're dealing with as we head towards FestPAC, Festival of the Pacific, which is going to be fantastic, by the way, June 6th to the 16th. Jamie's been just killing it on that with Aaron Sala and others. That's going to be a special event we'll talk more about perhaps. But we have to worry about invasive species. And so we're spending a lot of time on fumigation and making sure that the 28 nations that come to Hawaii don't have to worry about spreading any other bugs. These are good things. If we do well in ag, we do better as a global economy. If we have ag tourism, we do better. So all these things are connected. I was pretty surprised that I got 20 million for that.
Let's talk a little bit about Maui now. $1 billion for Maui. Do you see this? Obviously, this is a huge infusion of money, but over the long term, it's going to cost a lot more. Do you see this as a down payment? In the sort of overarch of Maui recovery, where does this $1 billion fit in?
So that's a great question. First of all, yes, it's a down payment on infrastructure and housing. A lot of this money is going towards repair of the infrastructure and building out housing, like the 450 units we have already broken ground on, which is critical to get people who otherwise have nowhere to go into modular housing, Kaleloa, which is key, right? And then we also have another 50 units that the county's doing on their own. We bought a building, it's 175 units, and all of this is going to be very helpful long term. Let me remind people of a couple things. So 3,071 families became displaced, and they all went into hotels, which we can't keep people in hotels for much longer. And it's been difficult because there was no housing. We tried to get short-term rentals. We got some. We got enough in the end just to kind of patch it together. But we have to build these houses. So we're now projecting over 1,200 housing units will be built. Plus, we do have the short-term rental laws that are changing. which is potentially going to bring back 7,200 housing units to the people of Maui. I mean, that's a giant game changer because we lost 3,071 families' houses, and we would add 7,000. But they've needed that for a long time. If we don't do these kind of things when we've had a crisis, we're doomed. Now, the feds have already spent over $2.2 billion, just so everybody knows what's going on. And that includes clearing the debris. Almost 2/3 of the debris is cleared now. A third of the properties have already been given back to the families, which is unbelievably fast given what happens on the mainland and elsewhere. So you have to do all these things. You can't not do them. But long term, we are going to need to continue to do all the things we need statewide. That's why the tax break still had to go forward. I was concerned when the messaging from the legislature was not totally on the mark. When they said that we were going to have these huge cuts in the state budget, we were going to be billions of dollars short. That was just a misunderstanding, if I'm being nice, because we had enough monies to get through and to pass the tax break. Also, we are banking on other things. I told you there's already been $2.2 billion that's come in from the feds. We expect another $1+ billion from HUD, Housing and Urban Development. That's going to help build a lot. But going forward, yes, we have to make people whole. There's going to be large lawsuit settlements. All these things are going to be, they're going to be on my plate to care for the people of Maui. Overall, though, it's interesting what happened. The fire, it broke our hearts when we lost 102 people. So we knew now that we have to do more safety, not just there, but everywhere. So now what are we doing? We're dropping in these special weather monitors, 40 of them across the state, which will help us a lot against kind of the unknown during these very risky kind of, fire hazard times, right? Also, we put in sensors. We can sense smoke now. Also, we did lots and lots and lots of fire breaks with the Department of Transportation. You simply have to do those things, but not just in West Maui. You got to do them in Waikoloa, and you got to do them in West Oahu. So we're getting more familiar with this new era where the climate has dried us out and the winds are stronger. All of this was necessary because if a fire had taken out part of Honolulu, you would have had not just 13,000 people displaced, you might have had 400,000 people displaced. And so our preparation is better. We have to have funds going forward to deal with these things, back to those bills that I'm talking about. But we learned critical lessons. We learned them in a heartbreaking way.
I want to follow up on the bill that you've already signed with regards to the counties getting the authority to regulate these short-term rentals. Maui County is acting on it already, and we talked about the importance of those housing, but that has come with pushback, criticism, some threats of lawsuits. How do you counter that message to those who maybe are opposed to this, and how do you find that middle ground of continue to navigate forward with this legislation that is now signed into law?
Sure. So a couple of the basics again on short-term rentals. For some, it's okay, but it got out of control. Hawaii is simply too desirable to everybody across the world. So we reached a point where we have about 89,000 short-term rentals in our small state, of which many thousands of those are on Maui because Maui has been a kind of a supercharged short-term rental market. So many housing units were absorbed that you just had no housing for local people. So at the end of the day, people are going to have to ask themselves, and the courts will too, are we going to put a priority on our people, our families, our ohana staying in Hawaii and working and having great jobs and providing service for the economy? Or are we going to allow a small sliver of people to get rich on our own properties? And also remember, of those 89,000 short-term rentals, over half of them are owned by mainland guys. So, I'm not of the mind that we should allow people make 400% profit on properties when, small families, young families can't find a home and the prices are $1.1, $1.2, $1.3 million. I mean, so we need to bring some of that back to the market. Expect significant additional legislation from me next year, which is going to probably require people to actually be living in the county if they're going to run a short-term rental. That would help our local people. Some local people should have a short-term rental, maybe for 3 months, maybe for 6 months. Maybe they'll be a little bit more compassionate about the cost that they apply to their short-term rental. But I can tell you, everyone else is getting as much money as they can every night, and that's not cool. So I'm going to keep pushing on that. If we get those 7,200 units back, that was the Minatoya decision. A judge named Minatoya, basically they grandfathered in a lot of units. If those 7,200 units come back, then not only will Lahaina Strong have won, but the people of Maui will have won, and all of us will have won. So special kudos to Pa'ele and those dudes, because that was very, very good power advocacy, and I appreciate them. And that will be even better when you get tens of thousands of units on Oahu, because Mayor Blangiardi, pushed very hard. He wants the short-term rental rule to be 3 months, which essentially means you could do some transitional housing if you're here for a short term of work, or you need a transition house, but then that will gradually become a long-term rental. That's really good. And the courts shot that down. They said that the state had to pass legislation. So, hey, don't ask me twice. If they say we have to do it, I'm glad to give that housing back to our people.
There's a question here from Stephen Ka'ahanui, who says, can we have the governor talk about the smart city he wants to build in Lahaina? I want to follow up on Stephen's questions, and also, you just mentioned Lahaina Strong, and we saw this group of people gather together, do some pretty heavy-duty activism, camping on the beach for an extended period of time to really force this issue, and we saw lawmakers respond. Going forward, when we think about the next phase, when the cleanup is done and we start to think about the planning of this community, what role do you think the state should take? What role does the county take? What role do the activists and the residents of that community take? And how do we make it so that there is more engagement and that things are productive, as opposed to being locked in and people feeling like, well, I have to camp on the beach to be noticed?
Okay, well, first off, you're very nice, okay? But
well, thank you.
But let's not conflate two things, okay? The Lahaina Strong guys that camped on the beach and protested are not Steve, okay? Steve is either a Russian bot or a jerk, okay? Because that is total bullshit that we're going to have a smart city. That's the kind of rhetoric where people say, oh, we're burning down cities so that we can start smart cities so that we can move people out, and the elite are trying to take over. I mean, it is such nonsense. That dude does not know what he's talking about. It incites conflict, and I'm obviously aggravated because it's not even policy making. It is pure crap. And I've seen that on the internet a little bit. Total nonsense. What are we doing? We're cleaning out debris. We're giving people actually permits now if they own their property and want to buy their house back or build their house back. That's the kind of stuff that is used to scare people. It's total misdirection. Now, on the flip side of that is normal people who are protesting to protect their rights, which is what Lahaina Strong and others have done, because they want to, build their homes back. They want to get short-term rentals put back into the market. But anyone who's saying smart cities, to me, they're looking for a fight, because it is ludicrous, it's fake, and it's the kind of nonsense that they try to, when these are the people that don't believe elections are legit, these are the people that think that laser beams burn down cities, these are the people that, I don't know, they think that there are space invaders coming down to the state of Hawaii.
Well,
so I think it's important that we separate lunatics from people who are actually trying to solve problems.
Well, Stephen does say thank you for the clarification, so I'm assuming he's not a Russian bot, and thank you for the engagement
Hey, those
here.
Russian bots are very sophisticated now.
We get good engagement from the governor when we get this kind of audience participation, so
Yes.
Stephen, we do appreciate you. But let's go to that second half then. What do you see the role of the activists, the community, the grassroots community, if you will, the county, and then the state? How do you all come together collectively? Because I think we can all agree that the vacation rentals were abusing the state, essentially.
Yeah.
But what Lahaina should look like, how do we figure that out?
People should just say what they want. And there's going to be some very magical things that are going to happen. For example, Keamoku and his crowd reached out to Mayor Bisson and myself and Jamie, and they want to restore Moku'ula, for example, which has been a battle since 1962. This is restoring the water to the sacred places from earlier kingdoms long, long before Western civilization fully, kind of planted here in Hawaii. We're doing it. And so water's already being restored. We're going to do what we need to do with the land and natural resource people to restore that land in a kind of a beautiful ahupua'a to Maui. And their advocacy is making that happen. And, there's been water battles for a long, long time on Maui, and it has to be resolved. So that's something that I'm going to do as a good faith gesture as a governor, and I so appreciate that activism got us there. At the end of the day, the people of Lahaina and West Maui have to decide what they want their town to look like. Some people, of course, have rights. They own their properties, and they're entitled to build back. There will be some considerations, like, of course, sea level rise is a concern. The setback from the shoreline has to be thoughtful. And if we end up not allowing people to build right along the ocean again, then in my mind, we have to make good on promises to give people, land swaps and so on. But I think there will be a community that is recommended by the people of Lahaina to rebuild Lahaina. I would not be surprised if there are other ideas to build up Mauka. KS, Kamehameha Schools, has been a wonderful partner and has begun to think, somewhat out loud about what it would look like. But really, we will take our cues directly from the people there. The mayor is closer to that than me. Obviously, he is every day, on the ground in Maui, and he'll have to determine with his constituents, what it should look like. We're 9 months since the fire. It's incredible the amount of progress that's occurred as far as, taking away debris and restoring the land. It's already starting to, see some green come back. But overall, it's going to take 5 to 10 years for all of the housing to be rebuilt. That's why the short-term rental legislation is actually critical. Otherwise, people would have to, leave Maui, and we don't want that.
Well, we got more coming up with Governor Josh Green. We want to also get to some of the things that maybe you did not agree with this legislative session. Maybe talk a little bit more about some of the vetoes or potential vetoes that could be coming up more with the governor right after this. Stay with us. Welcome back to Spotlight Now. We're going to get caught up with the governor in just a little bit, but we also want to encourage all of you who are watching online to ask your questions to the governor. You can continue to type them into our comment section on Facebook, or you can scan this QR code that you find on the bottom of your screen. We'll continue to track them as we continue our conversation with the governor.
So before we get off the topic of Maui, we always like to ask you for an update on the housing numbers. What are we looking at in terms of getting folks permanently out of hotels?
So we are now 81.3% of the way there, leaving 566 households still in the hotels. We are accelerating each week. More and more families are into long-term rentals, and in the summertime, I'm going to have these transitional houses to put people into. In fact, we already have some units over at Hagai, which is not in West Maui, admittedly, but it's 175 units if people want to go there. So it's a lot of progress. You know, we at one point, like I mentioned, we had 3,071 households that were in hotels, and now it's down to 566. And a lot of those individual households now are struggling in different ways. Like some have disabilities, some have pets that they have not been able to find a place, that would accept pets. Some of them have children where they have to be right near the school, and they have a disability. So that's why the last couple hundred families will be harder to find permanent housing for, but it's also why I'm accelerating our 450 unit housing project. And there's going to be some good news next week. I believe that the federal government is going to announce another large tranche of houses that will be built. So we will have partners that will get everyone housed.
When you're looking at just the long-term planning for what's to happen with Maui, as we talk about budgeting and legislative sessions and moving forward, how do you foresee this effort continue to be funded when federal dollars maybe lapse in a few years down the line? This is going to be a long-term commitment. Do you foresee something that needs to be a more dedicated Maui-specific fund moving forward within the overall budget in order to continue to finance how long and how much this is going to cost?
It will dwindle each year. The good news is we're actually just building regular housing. There's 6,000 housing units in the pipeline, and when those land, people will buy houses. They'll rent houses normally. We are putting together a plan right now so that we gradually wean people off of free transitional housing, and then that housing will be available kind of at a market rate, maybe subsidized somewhat since we've already paid for it, and those dollars will go back into social services. Also, I have a $460 million fund called TANF, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, and in the out years, which we should be using that money more aggressively as a state in general, in the out years in 26, 27, 28, if there's still a lot of need because people have social needs, there's a lot of extra depression and people are restarting their lives, TANF monies will be very helpful. And that's not out of the traditional budget. So that's a good thing. I would hope that each year we are able to have healed more and normalcy has, prevailed. It's incredible to watch the people of Lahaina come together. That is a great thing. It's an incredible thing. But it is going to take a long time until, no one will ever forget, but until you see a Lahaina that can welcome people back, that people are living in, that there are actual businesses there, because it was wiped clean. We have to build totally new infrastructure. That's another expenditure. But the county will handle most of those needs. Like I mentioned earlier, the HUD monies are going to go to Maui, and they're going to be used very thoughtfully by the council over there and the mayor. So I think actually we're going to recover economically a lot faster and better than people think. As you know, most of Maui was untouched. 90% of Maui was untouched by the fire, but 10% was a catastrophe. So watch those folks recover because they're super strong.
Okay, let's talk about some other things that came out of session. You have not released your intent to veto list, but can you give us a preview?
I will veto some legislation, I'm fairly certain. One thing, and I've met with Speaker and Senate President, and it's not an animosity position. There is one bill there that they set aside $300 million to go back into the rainy day fund and $135 million to go into the ERS. I don't like that bill. That's $435 million that I'd rather see us have a more conservative, secure economy and financial plan. we right now, if today I had to sign every bill and accept the budget, we would be actually $200 million in the red, which can't happen. As you know, last session line item vetoed $1 billion. We are good this year, but in the out year, the next year, fiscal year 25, I need to make sure that we are back in the black. My budget actually had us $600 million in the black, but once everything happened with the session, they spent an extra $835 million. And $300 million was to the rainy day fund, $135 million to the ERS. Like I said, I intend most likely to veto that and put that money to balance our budget. Again, I was very pleased with the funding for Maui. I was extremely pleased with the tax breaks for families that are living near poverty, which is a lot of us. About 43% of the state is living at or near the edge. But I can't have us have zero balance, year over year. We are going to emerge from this year with just under $1 billion. That goes till June 30th, and some of that money is going to carry over and solve this problem. But I'm in the middle of a lot of activity on Maui. So a lot of bills are being paid. I have to get reimbursements from the federal government. I have to wait and see how long it takes for those HUD monies to come. So I'm probably going to be cautious and veto that bill. There are other bills that I'm taking a close look at. I had a conversation with one of the senators about a bill that affects the university pretty significantly. And I'd say it's a coin toss right now whether or not I veto that bill. That's a bill, it's called RCUH, and that's kind of grants and how grants are handled. The senator's done a very good job cleaning up a lot of the processes over at the university, but it could be disruptive, so I have to figure that one out. And then I'm sure there are going to be a couple other bills. But in general, we worked very closely with the legislature to, one, kill any bills that were particularly not cool or kosher, and then fix whatever other bills that they needed some small tweaks to that we felt were necessary. So don't expect a lot of vetoes. I'm trying to work very nicely in the sandbox, and I just have to make sure our budget balances very nicely and that we're ready for what comes, because like I mentioned earlier, we're building housing. Well, we probably have to build even more housing still. The more housing we build, the less money we're going to burn in hotels and losing short-term rentals that are legit, that are okay for our economy. So there's a lot of work to be done, and it's not cheap.
We asked this question to Colin Moore last week when we were talking about the legislative recap for a grade that he would give to lawmakers this legislative session. What grade would you give your former colleagues there overall of how well you think they did?
They did really well on the appropriations and the management of housing. They did really well. They're still an incomplete on the questions of how we insure ourselves going forward. So they have an incomplete and I have an incomplete on some of these issues. But they did really well. They get top marks for helping us through the crisis.
Top marks is what?
Letter grade?
I am post-education now, so I refuse to grade anybody or accept grades from anyone.
Let's talk about some things that did not make it through. The green fee and legalizing marijuana, two things that you support, particularly the first part. Is this something, this is 2 for 2 now, not making it through. Are you going to try to do this in another iteration in the next session, or have you kind of given this idea up?
No, I'm going to keep going. I never quit at anything.
Okay.
So yeah, that's happening. That's what this climate action team is going to work on, and so I'll just keep coming at it. When I was a legislator, it took us over 10 years to pass a law to cover families with insurance if they had a child with autism. 10 years for something that's obvious that you want to do, because special interests got in the way, or I wasn't able to convince other legislators to do it, or God knows what. And that hurt because kids were suffering. That's Luke's Law. We ultimately named it. Luke went from age 5 to like 17 or something by the time we passed that law. And it was heartbreaking. So a couple years to pass a climate impact fee is okay. It takes time when there's large, transformational legislation that has to be passed. That's why I'm a bit stunned that I got my my GAP plan, or the affordability plans, passed in just the 2 years. That's great. I mean, that's really going to help people. But if we're thinking about the future of our state and how we deal with the $30 billion of climate impact, which is not a number we could ever pay for or finance regularly. We need a new mechanism. So one of these ideas will work. I still think that a simple fee makes a lot of sense, but the tourist folks hate it. That's why if my team comes up with this new model, like you mentioned, taking the the growth from the $1.5 billion rainy day fund, hey, that's great too. I'm going to also continue to lean on the federal government for support going forward, but you just never know which federal government you're going to have. I mean, I have a very good relationship with the current administration. I had an okay relationship with the former president, but I don't expect Hawaii's going to get a lot of extra help given the way things are and the polarized reality that we have politically. So I'm working real hard to do what we can locally to fix stuff.
Another bill that Yanji mentioned that did not move through, or legislation that did not move through, was recreational marijuana. The last time you were on this program, you had talked about potentially working with the Department of Health to increase or maybe lessen some of the restrictions for the medical marijuana and allowing more people to qualify for that. Have you given that more thoughts about what that would look like, and just your overall thoughts about recreational marijuana dying again this legislative session?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. The legislature does ultimately make the laws, right? So they have to decide what's in the best interest of the community and what they feel is safe. They weren't there yet on legalization of marijuana. However, something significant did happen in the last month since we were last together, and that's that the federal government has now recharacterized the classification of marijuana from a class 1 drug to a class 3 drug. They call it scheduling, Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. Schedule 1 is like heroin. Schedule 1 is certain methamphetamines, it's hallucinogenics. Schedule 3, and I hope I have all the right schedules, but I'm talking about the hardcore stuff is in Schedule 1, and they've had marijuana there incorrectly for a long time because many states use marijuana legally for medicinal purposes. So I was one of the people that supported medical marijuana, and I continue to do so. Now that they've put it into Schedule 3, it's a lot easier to do research. When you can do more research, you can find out what's safe for kids with developing brains. You can figure out what is or isn't something that can be tested when people are driving or driving under the influence. So it's very good. It'll make it easier for us. I have asked our Department of Health guys to look at just broadening the use for medical marijuana. I just think that makes sense, so that that's between a physician and his or her patient. I don't know when the legislature is going to ultimately change their opinion on marijuana. It's not my primary issue. I basically think that adults should be able to choose what they want to do with their bodies and their lives as long as they're doing it safely and not hurting anybody else. And then I stay out of their way. The legislature was very concerned because law enforcement is adamantly opposed to any decriminalization or legalization. So it's one of those things. It's a serious battle in the trenches at the legislature, and you want to have ultimately a strong majority of people that support it, and I don't think they had that.
I want to go back to housing. One of the big things that passed, and it was not without controversy, is allowing people with residential property to expand ADUs to 2 ADUs on property for residential lots. And a lot of folks in the urban core, did not want this. They say that they're, in urban Honolulu specifically, and the city council as well, saying that this is going to lead to too much density, too many cars, parking issues, what have you. This obviously did pass. You did not say you're going to veto it. I imagine that you support it, but what do you say to those folks who are worried that their neighborhoods are going to get overrun with these accessory dwelling units?
Right now, their neighborhoods are overrun with short-term rentals, and those short-term rentals come with a terrible number of cars and a terrible number of people that aren't from here. And I think actually we'd better just to right fit our state with housing. And ADUs are usually just transitional housing for like family members, a little extra space. Sometimes they become nice rentals for families who are just starting out. I think that overall we have to be compassionate about the need for housing for local families, and we have to try new things. And I think this is a pretty modest attempt to try new things. And so overall, that bill is pretty good. Now, the county councils will still have a chance for 2 years under this bill to describe what that should look like. The county council in Maui, they only took like 2 weeks to fix the short-term rental bill, over there and provide tax breaks. So, look, man, people can jump on this stuff and do it. They can do the work. There has been a lot of NIMBYism in our state. That's not in my backyard, and that hurts a little bit because when we see people who are poor not being able to afford housing, I just think you have to look in your heart and say, if we can solve the problem, we should do it. To those who are vocally opposed, look, we'll keep the lid on. It's going to gradually be matched to our need. And the better I do on short-term rentals, the less we'll need to do as far as building more houses anywhere. I still think we should build along the rail. I still think we should build some additional new housing just for our need for the next generation. But we could solve this housing crisis most of the way if we really take a bite out of short-term rentals and we just do a modest amount of, say, these ADUs.
Another thing that we have heard people speaking out against, or maybe having that NIMBYism, is on your kahale plans. Not everybody wants them in their neighborhoods. You, of course, put that stand-up one that came up across Queens Hospital in front of Washington Place for several months. What can you tell us about the kahale plan moving forward, the response that you're getting from the community, and where we can expect some of the next ones to pop up at?
Yeah, once people have them there, they see that it's actually a much more controlled way to deal with homelessness. I think that the numbers are due to come out, and they've been, teetering, even going up a little bit sometimes, by a couple percentage points. And we need to really get a lot more people off of the streets. Off of the streets is better than in a circumstance where people are getting staph infections and jonesing on drugs and acting out. So the kahale are very good. We've got a bunch of them. We've got the H4, we got Kalealoa, Waimanalo. We had the medical respite next to my house, which I'll probably bring back next year. The Windward Kauhale is up and running. The Middle Street Kauhale is up and running. We're going to do something with the mayor at Ivale. Cedar Church over on the west side is going to be a Kauhale. Waikiki Vista. It's a lot. And then the neighbor islands, there's going to be one in at least Kona and Hilo. And I'll tell you, every time we do them, people realize there's not a lot of people laying down on the streets, say in Waikiki, or not people laying on the streets down on Ali'i Drive. It's just better. We're going to eventually have 1,400 to 1,700 tiny houses in our state if I get 2 terms to do this. We're making really good progress. We already have 10 of them going. We need 20 or more. The way it would look would be in every community, every region, there would be a little bit of support for homeless needs instead of a lot in just a couple communities. And I think that's the fair way to go. Also, everyone should remember, if we let unsheltered homelessness run rampant, it will eat several $100 million of taxpayers' resources because people keep going to the hospital, go to the ER, see guys like me in the emergency department, suffer terrible consequences on the street. That money should be used towards things like pre-K, early education, new hospitals, and a civilized society deals with its problems up front. So when people say they're just not going to allow a kauhale, well, they're not the governor. So that's just the way it goes. I'm going to take care of people.
They're not the governor, all right. I actually want to go back to your veto and just clarify something. Your potential veto of that $300 million for the rainy day fund, $155 million for ERS. I understand the rainy day fund because it does have $1.5 billion in it, so it is flush with cash. But that money for the employee retirement services, am I getting that acronym right? That's pretty essential, is it not? Tell us why you think that is something that you can shift on in this session.
Well, that's just a bonus payment. That's an extra payment. So we would do all of our regular payments. It's actually a very small contribution. They wanted to put more in last year. So right now, honestly, it's kind of raining. We have to build housing on Maui. We have to make sure that we have enough money for people to stay in the state of Hawaii. So $145 million to park in a fund to pay it down just slightly and have a benefit 30 years from now is less important to me than dealing with our problems right now. I will tell you, we're spending money in other places instead. We're spending money on loan forgiveness for doctors so we have enough physicians, social workers, and nurses in our state. We're paying for some of these homeless services. We're going to announce some new plans, it looks like to me, to help homeless individuals that have been stuck here during COVID to get home to their families. I'd rather spend money on that, which is more helpful to our society now, than just a small aliquot of money that we won't feel. Honestly, I think that they put some money into these programs just to kind of keep me in check a little bit, because I got a lot of big ideas, and that's okay. That's the balance between the legislative branch and the executive branch. But as I said earlier, like, I presented a budget that had a $600 million surplus in fiscal year 2025, and they bottomed it out to $200 million in the red. So we actually can't afford to have that $300 million and $145 million be put away. We have to have those resources for our current budget.
As we continued in this conversation, today we've been talking really about the legislative session and just your overall dynamics. Again, with this being your second session as governor in this role, working with your fellow colleagues, you've had some success. You've had some things that did not go through, and we saw some confrontation and some disagreements at times with some of your appointees. There was also some clear frustration about some of the language that you even spoke about today, with some lawmakers saying that this is going to cost too much money. The state does not have money. Talking to your departments about potential cuts that never really came. But this also leads to the larger question of, how do you feel how would you characterize your relationship with lawmakers, specifically with your fellow colleagues in the Senate, because there seemed to have been some pushback by those members overall. How would you characterize the dynamics that happened this session?
It's pretty similar. I mean, there are moments, but most of the people have been confirmed that we've had. And to the extent that a couple people haven't worked out, that's just as much on me. So, I've made a couple appointments that just weren't natural fits. And I think that's just me being a first-term governor. I totally own that. I don't have any arguments or fights on a day-to-day basis. Do I get mad when people suggest that there isn't need out there? Of course I do. I see the need. That's my nature. I go out into the community and with people who have just had their town burned down or had a terrible accident. There were traumas that existed this year. But let's be clear about some of the facts. We did not have an economic circumstance where we had to cut 10 or 15% of the state government. That was a misunderstanding or a mistake. That was not accurate. And then it was validated, fortunately, by the Council on Revenues, which said we were straight up flat. And I will always be ready to adjust if we have to. But we were correct about that. We were correct about the amount of resources we have. And that's obviously what played out because, look, the evidence is there. They were able to fund a bunch of things and the tax break. In fact, the tax break that they end up giving for ALICE families, for families in need, is much larger even than we had envisioned, which I think is great. I thought that would have been a second-term tax break I would get. Instead, I got in second year. So they took to the idea, and then they amplified it, which was terrific. So I'm happy about that. I made a lot of appeals during the session between the legislative, schedule. Let's see, who do I fight with? I fight with whoever tells me that we can't care for people. And when they kill projects like that, I get kind of my backup. But overall, day to day, even when I'm in a battle, say, I think I had a pretty good battle with Senator Kehokalole this year. Afterwards, I really did praise Jared, and I appreciated publicly and privately how much work he did on the short-term rental bill. So we quashed that. I'm sure we will fight again, but it's not today, and it's there's a lot of goodwill overall.
Well, we're almost out of time, but Ryan.
One of the things that we want to do is we want to end on a high note. We did this the last time, and it's a way to get to know the governor a little bit more in some of the other lighter areas. So we have some quick lightning round questions, as we call them, as we like to end. Our first question: what podcast are you listening to, or are you a podcast fan? I'm
barely a podcast person, although if I had to say something, it would probably be like Stephen A. Smith's ESPN programming, because right. I am into his interpretation of Steeler Nation.
All right. Favorite place to eat when you're in a rush and you need something quick?
I like pretty much any pizza. So I will eat pizza of any stripe.
Okay. Who's your favorite local entertainer?
Well, Augie is someone who is very entertaining, both when he's on the stage and even when he's in the council chamber. So I got to give him credit.
All right, final question here. We're going to give you a scenario. You're stuck on a deserted island. You can only have one other person. That person has to be a member of the House or the Senate. Who would you pick to be stuck on an island with you, and why?
Oh my God. Let's see. Who would I like to be stuck with? Am I allowed to say Senator Schatz? Yeah, Brian and I really agree on a lot of things.
No. We gotta keep it right here in Hawaii.
Keep it local. Let me, for this year, give it to Representative Evslin, who came in this year and was just a fantastic state representative. He created some housing policy, which I thought was terrific. He fought like I've never seen someone fight before in their first year. This is a guy who's a survivor. I think he got run over by a boat one time and jacked up by the propellers and survived that. So if I have to be on a deserted island and I don't want to, get into any trouble at home, I'm going to pick Evslin.
That's a great answer.
Okay.
Well, it's been great to have you. Thank you so much for being with us today. Wonderful wrap up of the session. Colin Moore gave it an A-. We didn't get quite a grade from you, but it sounds, you said high marks.
It was high marks, yes.
Okay, Governor, thank you so much for being here. Spotlight Now continues right after this.
Spotlight Now with Yunji Denise and Ryan Kalei-Suji. Connecting you with newsmakers from throughout our islands. Going in depth with Hawaii's leaders and taking your questions live. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Well, great catching up with Governor Josh Green there. A lot that we covered, going all the way from what he thought overall were some of the wins of this legislative session, as well as a potential special session being called to address the insurance issue.
Yeah, and that is something we've talked about on this program. Insurance companies leaving the state because of the high risk after Lahaina, and also just looking at the hurricane insurance market. We see rates rising, particularly for condos and townhomes, and there are fears that that could spread to residential areas as well. Speaker Saiki and President Kochi did say that they were hoping to address that this session. That did not come to pass. And the governor now saying he could call a special session just to address that. He also talked about a potential veto for the money for the rainy day fund and the money for ERS.
Yeah, a lot to catch up on. We'll see you right back here next week for another episode of Spotlight Now, where we focus in on the rail. Aloha.